For those who don't know me, my name's Alf Torrents. I'm the Executive Director of the RBCC, and I'm delighted to welcome today the British Ambassador to Russia, Her Excellency Deb Bronnert, Judith Slater, who's Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which of course includes Russia, Trevor Lewis, Head of the Department for International Trade in Russia, and Colin Wells, Her Majesty's Consul General at the British Embassy in Moscow. Thank you as well, of course, to all the RBCC members and friends who have taken time out to participate to today's event. Before we get started, the normal ground rules as to how the webinar will run. After I've finished, I will ask the Ambassador and Judith to say a few introductory remarks. I'm sure that many of you will want to put questions to the panel, so please use the hand up function on the Zoom app to let us know you'd like to ask something. However, by far and away, the best way of getting your question heard is to use the chat function to send us your questions during the course of the webinar. The RBCC team will be monitoring the chat room and will try and pick out some of the more popular themes. Please keep your questions succinct, and it would be very helpful if you type in your name and company on your Zoom identification tag. If you can't do that, please include them with your question. We'll have everyone on mute, so please unmute yourself when speaking, and most importantly, please remember to mute yourself again when you've finished. We will be recording today's webinar and we'll post it sometime this afternoon. Ambassador, a very warm welcome. We spoke 3 weeks ago when the lockdown was still a novelty. This novelty, at least from my perspective, has well and truly worn off. And I know that business has had plenty of time to take stock and ponder the economic challenges ahead. Can you give us your comments on the trajectory of the crisis since we last spoke, with business in mind?
Look, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Good morning to any of you in the UK. It's good to speak to you again, and thank you to the RBCC for organising this one more time. And 3 weeks does, I have to say, feel like quite a long time ago. You know, we're obviously all continuing to live in troubling and uncertain times. And I think the first thing I want to say is of course, for those of you who are in Russia, please remember that the embassy is here to help. Alf has mentioned Trevor Lewis, who's on this call, whose team is ready to help with business queries. Colin Wells, our Consul General, is also on the call, and Colin and Sarah Pilbeam, who joined us last time, and her consular team, you know, are here and are here to help you. Sarah's not joining us today because she's at the airport. We've got about another 35 British nationals who are flying back to the UK today, and that's something that we're continuing to do, and continuing to help British nationals who want to leave Russia. We're able to help them do that. I think I also just want to say to start, I know that, you know, many of us have experienced loss and illness, and again we're very conscious of that, and conscious of the strain and anxiety everyone is under. So please do look to the embassy if you do need consular support. And I'll say a few words about what the British government and the Russian government are doing in terms of economic and business support, because as Alf says, this is has been going on now for some time, and the support packages are continuing to be refined and developed. Globally, and I'm glad Judith is on the call again, because I'm sure she'll want to cover this. Of course, the British government is both helping with the development aspect and the development impact of this terrible disease, including taking a leading role on vaccine development, and that's something that you'll probably hear a lot of actually for the in the weeks and months ahead. And this is critical. It's critical to you both personally, but it's also critical to get the global economy working again. So that's a huge area of focus. The other major area of focus, of course, is both keeping supply chains open and using the tools that government have to help avert some of the worst possible economic consequences. And again, I'm sure Judith will pick that up. And clearly Trevor and the team and the DIT team here are ready and willing to respond to particular queries. I know that in the embassy we are hoping, and Alf, you were asking, well, how long has this got to go on for? The Russian government, you will know last night that President Putin announced that the measures here would continue until at least the end of the May holidays, until at least sort of the 12th of May. And he also said that the government here would, by early May, start to set out how they might start to reduce some of the measures. But clearly in Russia, we're still seeing infections going up. We are thankfully seeing a slowing of the infection rate in Moscow, but it's still going up quite quickly in some of the regions. So I think certainly in the embassy, we are expecting that we will be living with restrictions of some sort or another for many months ahead. And even as we come out, as we hope, towards the summer and the autumn, we will have to learn to do business in quite a different way, unless and until governments have unless and until that vaccines have been developed and are being deployed. So we are certainly thinking in the embassy, the British government is thinking about not just the next few weeks, but the months and well into, I think, to 2021. So I would encourage all of you to be thinking within that sort of time frame about how you're going to do business differently and how you're going to do business living with some quite significant restrictions. In terms of what the British government is doing, and I'm sure we'll come back to that, the British government is one of the countries that's really come through with quite a very big package of support measures for business. And I'd encourage all of you to look at some of the websites, to do some research about the whole range of different instruments on offer, because they are being elaborated and improved all the time. But for example, DIT, of course, has the UK Export Finance, the UKEF, which is working with banks and insurance brokers, with loan schemes, export insurance policy, direct lending, and so on. I think they updated that last week. So please look at the UK Export Finance for what they can do for you. The Bank of England has a COVID corporate financing facility. Again, it's all on their website. If you search for the British Business Bank, you'll find the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. As I say, there's a lot of stuff out there, and perhaps what might be useful, Alf, is if Trevor and the team give you a list of websites that might be relevant to your members, so that they can be clearly signposted. Then just briefly, Russian government support. The Russian government and Moscow City have introduced some support for business. I'm expecting that this will be elaborated further. And we've seen over the last few weeks, further work on this, because it's very clear, I think, that the Russian economy, as all economies, but perhaps more the Russian economies than some, because of the impact on the oil price, are going to be hit very hard by all of these measures. But I've got a list here: tax deferrals and reductions, postponement of some insurance payments, and so on. So again, I'm sure Trevor and the team would be happy to supply some of these, or at least signpost where your members can find them. One point which came up last time, and I've been talking to other ambassadors about, and I know Trevor has been talking to some of your members about, we are aware that there's concerns about unfair treatment for some foreign-owned companies, and this is something that we're looking at, and we're looking at raising this with the authorities in order to press them to make sure that support that's available is support available for everyone, as indeed it is in the UK. Look, that's a fairly brief run through of what we can do, but I hope that sort of some material to start a discussion, and thank you very much, and look forward to your questions, and obviously look forward to listening to Judith as well, who I think is speaking next.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Hello, Judith. Yes, hi. So you're speaking from Istanbul?
I am in Istanbul, yes.
Yes, very warm welcome.
Explain to those that don't know me. I think I do know some of you from my various visits to Russia over the last 3 years. The last time I was there was last autumn, and I was planning to be there a couple of times between now and then, and I was hoping to come to speak, but obviously that won't be happening this year. But I'm Judith, I'm based in Istanbul, I'm the Consul General here. I'm also the one of DIT, the Department for International Trade's Trade Commissioners. There's 9 of us, and I cover Russia, Turkey, what was the former Soviet Union, and Mongolia, tapped on at the far east of the region. So my responsibilities are to put together and to deliver a regional trade plan. And we've got 70 staff working for DIT across the region in the 14 countries. The majority are in Turkey and Russia are by far our 2 biggest markets. Quite a few in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan because of the energy interests there, and scattered across the rest of the region. I mean, I'm answerable to Liz Truss, the Secretary of State for International Trade, and her team of ministers. And I mean, one of the good news aspects of this whole COVID pandemic, not that there are very many, but one of the few, I guess, for me, is that I have daily contact with ministers at the moment. So that's good for you also, because through me, there is a conduit right to the heart of government on the trade side. We're focused in my DIT team across the region on export promotion, on market access, so helping with things like free trade agreements, but in the case of Russia, helping to unblock barriers which might be preventing you from doing business. Very focused on inward investments, and the Russian team's been doing really well. To raise the profile of the opportunities that there are in Russia to British businesses who might not yet be there. I led a workshop, a roadshow of individual seminars around the UK, and Trevor Lewis was on that. I think Trevor spoke about that at the last one of these meetings, but that was very, very useful. And most of the key sectors that we focus on across the region, you won't be surprised to hear that Russia is an important part of our work. And I'll just quickly mention oil and gas, mining, agri-tech, healthcare, financial professional services, other forms of energy beyond oil and gas, technology, very important, aerospace. One of the particular areas that we're focusing on the moment, the services sector. The UK is underperforming in Russia in that sector, so we've done some work to try to analyse why that is. That's still ongoing, but we're 4% below what our global average in terms of the services sector. So we want to look into trying to boost work in that area. I mentioned that inward investment was doing well. Quite a few technology projects from both Turkey and Russia, actually, going into the UK. Last year, there were 12 projects that DIT Russia was involved in. I mean, I'm sure there were others, but these are the ones that we know about and that we helped to make happen. So created 340 jobs in the UK. Most of those were in the technology sector. I mentioned that I was disappointed that SPEEF isn't happening. I came to SPEEF last year and I found it extremely useful. Very impressed with the high level of senior British participation. Of course, no ministers in there. We were hoping to try and see whether we could get the permanent secretary from the Trade Department to come. She was very keen. So we'll try and see whether we can stand that sort of thing up going forward. The ambassador mentioned that I'll say something about what's going on at the London end. There's a lot. I have these daily meetings with Liz Truss and her ministerial team. I mean, there are a number of key focuses, and Deborah mentioned some of them. Securing PPE, personal protective equipment for the UK, is a really, really key focus, and we've been doing a lot of work on that in Turkey, which you may have seen in the British media. There was quite a lot in the media last week about helping to free up some deliveries of that. There are a number of priority countries, China, India, Singapore, Taiwan, Turkey being another, helping to ensure that countries are not retreating into protectionism, a really key focus at the moment, not just during the period of the crisis, but as we come out of it, that countries, we keep these supply chains open, we think about coming out the other side, and you're probably pleased to hear that there is work going on. It's not getting a whole lot of publicity, but there's a lot of work going on looking at the different sectors of the UK economy and how are we going to get those back up and running as soon as possible when we're able, looking at things like social distancing, safety of workers, freight, all these sorts of things, looking at sectors like technology, which is actually one of the least affected, agriculture, which is also having to keep going. So those two are being looked at closely, but also other areas like automotive, like creative sector. So I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that work's going on. And then the Secretary of State herself is very focused on the G20. She's speaking to her G20 colleague. She spoke to her Turkish colleague yesterday. Obviously, she doesn't have ministerial contact with her Russian counterpart, but nevertheless, the G20 is the forum which she is using to try to ensure that this free trade agenda is picked up and run with by the big economies. Ministers are doing a lot of business engagement. Every day I hear tell of which businesses they've been seeing, and also which trade associations, which roundtables they're having with different sectors. So those of you that are British companies with HQs back in the UK, you are more than welcome to join some of these meetings. And if there's anything you want me to take up, I'm having regular discussions with ministers. I've ut one this afternoon, for example, with Lord Grimstone, Jerry Grimstone, who's been brought into the ministerial team. So there is an avenue for you to, for me to put any points that any of you have direct to ministers. As I say, this is a real advantage of the current situation, and I hope it continues afterwards, that this enhanced access that we have to ministers. So I'm really keen to hear from you how you're finding things in Russia that will help to inform what I say to ministers. So I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions, and it's great to be part of the group. Thanks for inviting me, Alf and Ambassador.
Judith, thank you very much for that. I think before we get to that, I've been looking through the questions we've been asked, or you've been asked, I should say. There's quite a few on flight, so I think I'll start with that. And that really, I suppose I'll direct to Colin, if that's okay. And Colin, when you answer, it might be quite useful for the audience if you give a little background to what you do and what you're up to at the moment. So we've basically, a general theme on flights is when will they start? And I think there's a concern that people don't feel they're well advertised, so that they're not quite sure of when they will go. That's one theme. There's an acceptance that it's slightly crystal ball gazing, but they're asking for the embassy's best guess on flights.
Yes, can you hear me, Alf?
Yeah, perfectly.
Good, fantastic. Okay, so yeah, happy to try and answer some of those questions. As for, there are two types of flights, I suppose. One is when we get scheduled air services again, as one remembers it before the lockdown started. Difficult to predict that, and I wouldn't want to try and guess when that's going to happen. We know anyway, it's common knowledge that Aeroflot are not taking bookings until the 1st of August. BA are similarly not taking any bookings to the 1st of June. That might change. So those decisions are we're watching, we're in contact with the authorities as well as airlines, but at the moment it'll be difficult to predict where those regular services might restart. What I think you and many members might have picked up is that there are occasional flights going to the UK. We're also, as a result of our contact with Aeroflot, but also the government, as well as other embassies based here in Moscow, we're picking up on indirect flight options. So the Russian authorities, for instance, are running a number of repatriation flights for their nationals to come from London, from Madrid and other European capitals back to Moscow. They've been flexible with some of those, if not all of those, in allowing embassies, European Union embassies, the UK embassies, as well as the Americas, to use those flights to put to put foreign nationals on to go back home. So we have been we've been using those to move British nationals back directly when there've been the very few. There's been 2 or 3 in April, direct flights to London. We've used those to move larger numbers. We used an American repatriation flight that was touching down in London to move nationals to there, as well as we've also used a few indirect routes as well, Frankfurt and Madrid, to move British nationals back. Where can you find the information? At the moment, I would say that my best plug to you all, to all of your members, is to use our travel advice. get onto the travel advice, which is on gov.uk. It's a simple Google. Russia travel advice will come up with the link very quickly. Also, when you get on there, register to get updates, because every time there's an update, you'll get an email. And we keep that relevant and updated, and we are putting details of the direct flights to London onto that travel advice. The second thing on that travel advice as well, there is an email address, coronavirus.russia@fco.gov.uk. I could send that through to you after disseminate, where if you're interested in going back to the UK, we can keep you alerted to when there are indirect flights options as well. I should have said at the beginning, Alf, you asked me to say what I do. Myself and Sarah Pilbeam, who was on this last call, we run the consular service here with the ambassador. And that's why today, as the ambassador said in her first comments, today we're looking to move 35 British nationals onto a direct Aeroflot flight to London. That flight's come up as a result of the Russian need to have a flight to go to London, but they've reached out to us as a result of our lobbying to allow us to put British nationals, other nationals from other friendly countries as well, European countries going on those for that flight as well. So we're working hard on that, as well as individual consular issues as well from those British nationals who just can't get back for whatever reason or don't want to get back as well.
Thank you very much, Colin. Yeah, I think one of the problems is there's so much information. Sometimes the signposting is what is the difficult issue, and anything you can do to help would be most welcome.
Yeah. Alf, can I maybe come in on that?
Yes, of course.
Just to reinforce what Colin said about emailing us, when we quite often will have early warning from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that there's going to be a flight before we have the details about timing and before it goes up on the Aeroflot website. When we get that, we will always email, WhatsApp all the British nationals who've told us that they want to get back to London, so that they know to start preparing that there'll be a flight. We normally know, a day or so around which their flight will go. So if people do want to get back, it's really important that they drop us a line on that email, and then we will give them tailored, we will give them a personal WhatsApp or email or whatever works to tell them that there's going to be a flight. So we will do that for people if they've told us they want to get back. And so far, I think, looking at Colin, we've managed to get everyone back who's wanted to get back within, a few days, sometimes a week if they're trying to get their dog back or something. But we've managed to get everybody back so far.
And how do people sign up to that? Sorry, I'm sure it's absolutely obvious, but so
the email and it's coronavirus.russia@fco.gov.uk. We put it out on all our Twitter, Facebook. I'm sure it's on the website. We can send it to you after this again, so that all your members know what it is. But that's just for flights. If people need to, if they're in Russia and want to get back to the UK. And they're British nationals.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for that. Staying on a theme, we've also had quite a few questions on visas, and one from David Kant, who's from Albion Overseas, has asked, his multi-entry visa for Russia expires in a couple of weeks. In your dealings with the Russian MFA, have you any hint that existing UK nationals' visas for Russia might be extended, or whether there's even any point applying for a Russian visa, whilst travel seems to be a distant possibility? I note that the MFA have extended work permits, for example. So, Colin, I suppose that's your
yes. I could try and come in on that, Alf. Yeah. The Russian government has suspended activities. The current date for resuming those is June 15th. But in the meantime, part of that suspension has been a form of waiver of the deadlines on visas. So details on that particular on the position for British nationals and their visa status is in our travel advice. Again, go to travel advice and click on the coronavirus tab. That's also where we will update when the Russian government's in a position to resume its services to foreign nationals living in Russia. We will put details of that straight onto travel advice. and onto our social media information campaigns as well. So in addition to registering with our travel advice, register in with our Facebook and Instagram pages as well.
Great. Ambassador, do you want to add anything, or is that?
I suppose the only thing I would say is I see breaking news that the Prime Minister Hamish Houston has just said that the ban on foreigners coming into Russia is being extended. We expected that, if you're a mono-British national, there's a tiny number of exceptions, but most British nationals will not be able to come into Russia until that ban is lifted. What we understand informally is that obviously the government will be looking at infection rates globally, and they'll also be looking at what other countries are doing in terms of when they lift travel restrictions. So a lot of European, US and so on, they have travel restrictions too on foreign nationals coming in, and I think the Russian government will be looking at when those are lifted, as well as what's happening in globally before they take decisions. The UK is relatively unusual in that we do not have restrictions on other nationals coming into the UK.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Moving back to the world of business, although of course the visa issue is very relevant to that. Quite a general question from Robin Preston from Lucullus Educational Consultants. He said, he asked, Einstein said, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Would you agree with regards to British companies working in Russia? I think the natural person to take that is Trevor. Would you like to start with that, please?
Yeah. So have you got me there, Alf?
Yes, yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, no, very happy to take that one. As I say, I think I mentioned during our last call that the last quarter for which we'd had the figures, the trade figures, the UK-Russia sort of experts were looking very good, actually. They were looking quite healthy. So we're on quite an upward trend. These things can fluctuate from quarter to quarter, but over the course of last year, it was looking pretty positive. So everything was heading in the right direction. But of course, coronavirus has knocked us off track a little bit on that. But it hasn't dimmed our ambition at all. So I think as and when we can get back to normal, we're very keen to get things going. I'm looking, as I think I said last time, probably September realistically before we can get some of that work done. But just in terms of some of the things that we've got in mind and for which we've secured funding to do things this financial year, which effectively means by around this time next year. So just things I've got on my list at the moment are automotive, life sciences, particularly oncology and cardiovascular, taking some Russian buyers to the Medica show in Düsseldorf, some work around equestrian, financial technology, fintech, beauty, retail, interior design, oil and gas, particularly taking some Russian buyers to sub-Saharan Europe, which might seem counterintuitive to some given the sanctions, but actually we've had some quite success there before by taking Russian buyers there where you've got a good cluster of British companies they can meet in quite a confined period of time. Some work around smart cities, food and drink, TV content, creative industries, some legal work, including some work in Ekaterinburg. And then climate change and the green technology, which is worth emphasising because as those in the know will probably be aware, the COP26, the big international meeting on climate change, which we were due to host in Glasgow in November, has been deferred, put back. But again, that hasn't diminished our ambition, not just to hold the meeting and have a great deal of success at that meeting with our partners Italy, but also to do a lot around the business environment because some of the themes are great. We want to make progress on those, but as far as the business community and British businesses are concerned, we've got a lot of expertise in that sector, and we'd like to bring that expertise to Russia. So I hope that just gives you a sense, and the person who asked the question of what we're trying to do is very diverse, but there really is a big burst of energy which we're planning, say, towards the end of this year and into early next year. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Trevor, for that. A very comprehensive answer. Judith, is there anything you'd like to add from the regional perspective, or has Trevor said it all?
So, I mean, I think there is work going on. I mean, we'll be talking to Lord Grimstone later today. I mean, partly about opportunities that, you know, we're trying to crystal ball gaze a bit about which sectors we think might be offering opportunities post-crisis. I mean, I think there's a couple I'd mention. I think manufacturing supply chains, there'll be overall businesses will be seeking to diversify away from China. Even though the crisis obviously began there and has gone global, businesses will no longer want to be single sourcing whatever components it is that you happen to be talking about. So there may be opportunities for Russia in that, where businesses may want to source not just from China. So Russia has a strong manufacturing sector. And then the other big theme, I guess, is just the whole digitalization technology theme, because of the people are discovering that remote working, can be advantageous in lots of ways. So I think people will be looking to do more of that, to be doing more digitally. And again, the companies that we're getting inward investment from Russia, but a lot of, both the UK and Russia strong in that field, and the strong collaborations going on there. So I think those are sort of two big picture themes. But interested to hear whether, anybody, what the questioner himself thinks on one. If that's all right.
Sorry, the last bit of your statement there was cut off. Can you just say the last couple of sentences?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, I'd be interested to hear what the person who asked the question thinks in terms of these sort of big themes of opportunity.
Yeah, Robin, are you there? Robin Preston? He submitted this one by post. I don't see him. No. Robin? No. Okay, let's move on anyways. But thank you, Judith. A slightly more techie question, but also interesting to quite a few people, I suspect. The President, Vladimir Putin, has announced that a 15% withholding tax is to be imposed on dividend and interest payments from Russian sources to foreign jurisdictions. Cyprus has already been asked to modify its double tax treaty with Russia to accommodate this. Has there been any similar approaches to the UK? Sorry, Trevor, I know we discussed this offline slightly, but could you just give the government's position on that, please?
Yeah, well, I've checked within the embassy, so we're not aware that the Russians have approached us on this at all. So I say that with degrees of certainty as far as the embassy is concerned. I will double check in due course and over the course of the next 24 hours with colleagues in London, just in case for some reason the Russian embassy has approached the Foreign Office in London rather than come through the embassy here. But all I can say with certainty is that they haven't approached us in Moscow. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Okay. And a couple of visa related questions, but with a clear business focus. The first one is Norma Meyer represents a leisure travel company. What's the likelihood of there being a relaxation of visa requirements between Britain and Russia? And I suppose slightly related is, do you think there will be a relaxation of business people being able to travel between UK and Russia before general restrictions are lifted? I don't know who that best to answer that there. Maybe Ambassador to kick off with that one.
Shall I kick off and then Colin may want to come in? So for the moment, business travellers are not exempt from the ban. There are certain groups that are exempt, but not business travellers. But we have been, and I have been making the point, both Moscow City, and we've also been talking to the MFA, pointing out that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, pointing out that, first of all, the UK doesn't have these kind of restrictions on Russians who want to come to the UK, but also, of course, that we will all want to get our economies going again. And, part of that is actually helping business travellers move. And I think we're quite conscious that we have quite a lot of British business people who sort of live both between the UK and Russia, and are perhaps in the UK now because that's where they've chosen to spend the lockdown period, but actually, have economic interests, quite often work in Russia. So there aren't any signs of that at the moment, but I think it is an important point, and it is one that we are making and will continue to make as this goes on. In terms of, will we look at differences in our visa regime? we've certainly, and this isn't just a Russia point, we've been taking moves to try and streamline and digitize and make visas more straightforward. You know, I think the last time I checked, we were, and we're obviously, we can't offer a visa service at the moment under current conditions, but I think we were granting something like 98% of Russian visa applications. So we are always trying to make it simpler. I gather from Russian counterparts that they are also thinking about this, but precisely what will happen, I think it's a bit early to say. I don't see the UK removing a visa requirement for Russia.
Thank you very much.
Alf, from my perspective, nothing further to add. I was going to add that last point, if the ambassador hadn't already said it, that there isn't a plan to withdraw any of the visa requirements at the moment on the UK side. There is, of course, for Russia to make its own decisions.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. A question from Yuri Praslov. Not sure. Oh, he's from the Russian Managers Association, and he asks, is there any scientific cooperation in vaccine development between Russia and British institutes that you know of? And if there isn't, is it now the moment to initiate this type of activity? Yeah. Trevor, I suppose, or Ambassador?
So it's a good question. Trevor may know more about the detail. We don't have anyone from our scientific team on the call. This is an area, so we are cooperating under the framework of the World Health Organization vaccine development, and the UK is co-hosting with a number of with the European Commission and quite a lot of other countries a big meeting on vaccine development next week. I think it's 4th of May, it's Monday. And then we are also hosting on the 4th of June a big pledging conference for Gavi, and I've forgotten what Gavi stands for, but basically what we're trying to do, I mean, with many other countries, and we hope with Russia too, I wrote to the Health Ministry last night about this, is we are trying to really sort of kickstart vaccine development. There's quite a lot of vaccines under development across the world. So the first meeting is to try and really come together and speed up vaccine development and deployment. And then the 4th of June is about making sure that once we've got vaccines, they are very widely available, because clearly the best way of the world moving on from this terrible virus is that we have vaccines that can be widely deployed, and we're very conscious that it's not just about the UK getting through this, it's actually about all countries, including Russia, and including obviously countries which have much worse health systems than we do, than we're fortunate to have in the UK. But Trevor, I don't know if you can, there's so much scientific collaboration that goes on, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we have some, but we may not know about it in government.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's sort of quite a lot of global outreach on this at the moment, but I'm not aware of any specifically with Russian partners on this. And I think this is potentially a sort of a victim of the fact that a lot of our university to university relationships have deteriorated and faded a little bit over the last few years. So some of you on the call, I'm sure, will be aware that we brought quite a large group of very senior UK vice chancellors here in November to start rebuilding those relationships. So that's work in progress, which again has been slightly sort of knocked off the rails by this. But I think it's work that we definitely want to reinvigorate again, as and when we get back to normal. So I'm not aware that there is any at the moment, but I will ask colleagues on the science side of the embassy, just in case they're aware of something that I'm missing, but I don't think so. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. A question from Martin Zubko. He doesn't say which company he represents, but he asks, how would you describe the quality of communication with the Russian authorities during the virus crisis, which is affecting everybody and everything? Britons and Russians stuck in respective countries, the business community, investment projects, etc. Ambassador, would you like to start with that one?
So I would start off by saying, this is a new disease, and I think all governments across the world are trying to work out how best to respond to it and what to do in really challenging circumstances. What we've had in Russia, certainly the contacts that we've been having with Moscow City and with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, particularly about flights, I think have been really, really helpful. I think it's probably true we're seeing less on the economic side, but Trevor may wish to comment on that. And we're also seeing less on the health side, although we are trying to expand those contacts. I'm not saying that in a critical way, because health services are really under pressure here as they are elsewhere. And, and I'm conscious that, the primary focus of the Ministry of Health here should be to help Russian citizens get through this this really stressful and difficult period. But certainly we've had Moscow City have been very helpful and accessible, and the MFA have also given us lots of useful heads up, particularly about flights. But Trevor, I don't know if you want to say anything more about the sort of more economic side.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, it's quite quiet at the moment, as you might imagine, because my team are working from home or not working on enforced leave, and obviously a lot of Russian government colleagues are in the same situation. So I wouldn't expect there to be a huge amount. But just to give perhaps a specific example where we've had a problem around export health certificates for the exports of live animals, which has been a sort of very current issue and an immediate one in terms of sort of supplies and animals getting to borders and not being allowed through, and so on and so forth. And actually the support that we've had, despite the fact it's been very remote and from people working at home from Russian contacts on that, has been very, very good. They've been very supportive, they've been very helpful, they've not stood in the way of the issues, they've just come up with practical issues that we've needed to address on our side, and they've come up with solutions to help us do that. So I think they've been very, very interactive with us on that, I say, despite the fact everyone's working from home. So that's been one example, and it's the only one I can come up with, as we've been working on over the last few months since we've been in this situation. But actually the Russian authorities have been very, very good with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Judith, anything you'd like to add from a regional perspective? Hello?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I don't think so. I don't think I've got anything to add on that one. Thanks, Alf.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Moving back to Colin, really, and the Ambassador, there's quite a lot of interest in the status of dual nationals. We have one question saying, or asking, how do you consider dual nationals? Would they be able to return to the UK from Russia, for instance? Also, is dual nationality recognised in the UK? If legal, are there any advantages or disadvantages of having dual nationality? Colin, if you want to start.
I could have a bash at that, and of course, if the Ambassador wishes to come in afterwards. On the first point, dual nationals. Look, we have been moving dual nationals back to the UK on the various those few flights that we've been able to use. And indeed, there are a number of the 30 to 35 British nationals leaving today. Some of those also have Russian nationality, as well as having dual nationalities with other countries' nationalities as well. So there was some issues at the start of the lockdown, but at the moment we're being able to provide that service. On that second question, the United Kingdom has, for as long as I've been in the service, and that's a long time, certainly recognised dual nationality. It's not part of our nationality laws to forbid dual nationality. Often what one finds is that the second nationality, the country of the second nationality, is the one that will often restrict. And I saw the question that was posed by Robin Joyce, I think, the answer there is that whilst the British authorities will not prevent you or penalise you in any way for having a second nationality, in the case of acquiring Russian citizenship, the Russians' current Russian nationality laws prohibit dual nationality. That might change, of course. As for major disadvantages and positives, the positive obviously is a second passport, less need for a British visa to come into Russia. Oh, sorry, Russian visa to come into Russia. But I should point out that our ability to provide a consular service in Russia for British nationals with Russian citizenship is inhibited and can be inhibited because under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, the Russian authorities do have the ability and the right to be able to say that we have no locus with individuals who they consider to be Russian citizens in Russia. That wouldn't be the case for British Russian nationals in India or France or the United States, but in Russia they view the Russian nationals as their nationals. So that's the one thing I would probably flag up at this stage. I don't know if the ambassador has anything further to add.
Thank you, Colin. I suppose the thing I would add is that this is completely normal under international law. If you come into Russia on your Russian passport, the Russians are absolutely within their rights to treat you as a Russian citizen, and it doesn't matter how many other passports you might have, and it doesn't matter if your permanent home might be somewhere else. So they have been allowing us to help dual nationals get on flights where the dual nationals in particular, basically they live in the UK or they work in the UK, but the Russian government don't have to do that. So that's worth bearing in mind. Under this circumstance, the Russian government could say to dual nationals in Russia, well, sorry, Russian legislation says that Russian nationals can't leave, so we won't let you leave. Now, in fact, they're being very pragmatic and rather helpful, and so they have helped us. But, you know, these are conditions under which it is a bit complicated. You know, but it's really up to you to make it your personal assessment as to what works for you as an individual. In the UK, we have a very liberal approach to dual and treble and quadruple nationals. But we're quite unusual. Quite a lot of other European countries will not allow dual nationals.
Okay, I think that's very clear. Thank you for that. Moving back more into a more technical business area, we have a question from Paul McVitie, who works for CAD Works Engineering. And he says, or asks, our company is providing heavy engineering equipment to be shipped from the UK via the Arctic Ocean and through Siberia before the shipping lane closes up with ice. The contract delivery has been severely impacted by the force majeure circumstances around COVID-19. Is there an understanding in Russian business that the impact of COVID-19 on UK industries will last longer than the current lockdown period and before we regain our full capacity once lockdown eases? How can we best communicate this to our client? Trevor, I can add something myself later, but do you want to start with that, Trevor?
Well, I'll have a go. Obviously, it is indeed quite technical, Alf, so I'm happy to take it offline and try and get the details and understand exactly, you know, where the pressure points are and which buttons we would normally need to push on this, because, as I say, without knowing the detail, it's difficult. Having said that, I think, you know, everybody understands it's a difficult, you know, situation for everybody in business around the world. You just need to turn on the news to see that. So that's not lost on the Russian government either. So I think, you know, they would be understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean that they would, you know, want to change rules and regulations to fit individual cases, but I'm happy to look into the detail and see if there's anything we can do to help. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. And of course, I'd like to say, I mean, obviously we're a business association whose job is to raise these sort of issues with respective governments. We work closely with the other major business associations in Moscow. I'm thinking of the Association of European Business, AmCham, et cetera. And there's lots of issues that affect all businesses which are brought to our attention, and we either write bilaterally or indeed write joint letters to raise concerns of business to local government and indeed federal government. One, for instance, which we sort of touched upon, was protectionism. There is the Russian government has indicated that they will only support business in Russia which has more than or less than 50% foreign ownership. Obviously, this we see that as unfair, and that's something we are working together with the other business associations to bring to the attention of to the Russian government to make our feelings known on that. well, not our feelings, the feelings of foreign business operating in Russia. Good. Okay. A question from Gulyar Sabieva. I think it's slightly a business pitch, but I think it makes a good, valid, more general point. And he asked, will the pandemic and its consequences affect the economic relations between Russia and the UK? And is there a need to create a special legal centre at the embassy to advise Russian British business during the pandemic? I like the pitch, but also I do think it raises the valid point that this is a very sort of tricky time, lots of legal aspects to take into account, and I suppose it's asking what the embassies do, what's the remit of the embassy in this area. Ambassador Trevor, who wants to?
Probably a point, this one.
Yeah, I think it's more Trevor. Yes.
Yeah, no. Yeah, happy to sort of try and answer. No, I mean, you know, as far as the embassy is concerned, obviously anything in the legal sphere is way beyond our competence. So we wouldn't want to get into sort of, you know, extreme legal matters like that. I think, you know, in terms of RBCC members, what I would suggest is that, you know, this is an opportunity for the legal practitioners themselves to win some business from it. But if anyone's got some specific points they want to put to us, I'm happy to look into it. But certainly it's not within our remit to set up a legal team within the embassy, because the level of expertise is, as I say, is beyond our skills on that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. A question here from Natalia Trembovetskaya, and she is a business development director of the Managers Association, and she says, do you think after COVID-19 crisis, will the Russia-UK relationship soften? And she mentions that Russia are helping a lot of European countries, Italy, for example, with foreign aid or support in the medical arena. Ambassador, I think that's more political.
So I suppose first of all to say, I think Russia did provide Italy with some useful equipment and deployed some doctors as well. And I know from discussions with the Italian ambassador that the Italians are very grateful for that. They haven't done the same to the UK. We haven't asked. You know, in the course of the last year, the bilateral relationship has stabilised, and we already earlier on this year we had some senior visits. We had a meeting between the Prime Minister and the British Prime Minister and the Russian President. We had more planned. You know, that we still have some major disagreements with Russia, which are well known, so I won't go into them now. But I think there are, despite those disagreements, there's still a lot of things we can work together on, and we are working together on COVID-19, particularly, you know, on the economic impact in the G20, on the health impact within the context of the World Health Organization. And actually, I've just seen on Twitter, if I may, but the rather nice news that our Prime Minister and his fiancée Carrie Simons have just had a baby boy. So that's a bit of positive news in the midst of all this.
Great. Another Russian name, perhaps, for the baby? Let's see.
Not announced yet, but I'm sure we'll be open to suggestions.
Yes, good. Okay, thank you very much. Another, I suppose, more on the political side, a question for the ambassador. Is the virtual summit of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council still on track? Will Britain participate? Well,
obviously not today, given the news. Yeah. But no, where we are on that is we have told both the Russian government, and I've told the Russian government and partners that we are supportive in principle. You know, the original idea going back was for sort of a physical summit. I don't think that's likely to happen, certainly not in the short term, given that all of our leaders, as well as all of us, are doing everything you know, on Zoom or on different other platforms. But no, we're in touch with the Russians and other partners about how to take that forward.
Great, thank you very much. If I may, because there's a very specific question for Judith here with her consular hat on, and it is, my daughter is stuck in Turkey and said flights from Turkey to the UK will be grounded until September because the UK reacted slowly to COVID. Have you any indication of when flights might recommence and whether this is real or fake news? My daughter's only 20 and is on Instagram a lot, so I suspect that's the fake news bit.
Yeah, no, there are actually some flights going from Turkey to the UK. In fact, there was one that went yesterday, Pegasus, which is a budget airline. And just the same way that the ambassador was describing and Colin was describing the process that's going on in Russia, very, very similar here. We've got about 600 British nationals who have registered with us, who are keen to get back to the UK. And there have been until recently 1 or 2 routes where you could actually go, for instance, via Belarus on Belavia and via Qatar. Those are now pretty much closed down. But there's another flight, for example, there's a flight on the 5th of May back to the UK, which is being put on by Pegasus. So all that this person needs to do, if they haven't done it already, is to look at our Facebook page or get in touch with me directly and I can direct the person to that. Register with us and then you'll receive information about flights. It's a very similar process. These flights come up at quite short notice often. We've been doing our level best to bring these to the attention of the short-term visitors here who want to get back. So there are dribs and drabs of flights, but the flights are not being there has been space on all the recent flights. So I don't think it's quite as gloomy a picture as your questioner was actually painting.
Good. Okay, thank you very much, Judith. A couple more questions before we run out of time. One clearly for Colin. It's obviously a dual nationality, asking his passport expires in September, stuck in Russia, can he renew it while being in Russia and given the taking the travel restrictions into account?
Yeah, can I ask that member, I've seen that question, can I ask that member to write to the coronavirus email address that I've put onto chat so that we can deal with that specifically and provide him or her with the correct advice. It's really good. They've given us a bit of advance notice there. My gut instinct that it shouldn't be an issue, but we'll try and help them.
Yeah, I think we've extended. Yeah.
Sorry, Ambassador?
No, I think we have actually decided to extend all expiring passports, but it maybe depends on the date of expiration. But I think we are doing that in a sort of virtual way.
Yeah. And there was a question on a British citizen being on a business visa in the UK and it running out. Actually, I'm in exactly the same situation myself. And I know that a decree was passed that if you were in Russia on the 15th of March legally, then your business visa is automatically extended till the 15th of June. So yeah, hopefully you were legal at that time, in which case you haven't got anything to worry about till mid-June.
That's correct, Alf. And again, going back to the travel advice, any changes, any updates we get from the authorities, we'll put into the travel advice. And again, on the chat, I've put the travel advice web address on chat for those who need it.
Good. Great. Well, panelists, Ambassador, Judith, Trevor and Colin, thank you very, very much for your time. I know, having spoken to a lot of members, that this is extremely well appreciated. Yes, people are extremely grateful for the chance for a face-to-face, so to speak, opportunity to ask their questions. That's all we have time for, I'm afraid. I'd just like to put a plug for our next webinar, which is on the 12th of May. And we'll be speaking to the Moscow city government, to their Commissioner for Business. And you'll be able to put to them directly any questions you may have on what support packages the Moscow city government have in place, and indeed at the federal level as well. So I hope you'll join us for that. Details will go out in the next few days. We're just looking at the agenda for that. Indeed, you can help us put that agenda together by letting us know what questions you would like answered from the Moscow city government. If you wouldn't mind emailing those to me or to James Lee, details are on the website. That would be extremely helpful, and that will enable the Moscow city government to get the right speakers in for what should be a very, very interesting webinar. I think there's lots of information out there, but like these particular webinars are so useful in that they bring all the experts together, and you're actually hearing it from an authoritative source, rather than just trying to cobble together various impressions from a load of websites. Good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Ambassador, Judith, Trevor, Colin. Till next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Pleasure.